Hey everyone, this is Intro to Atomic Chess 2. It's the second episode I'll be doing. In a series of atomic chess lessons, and I hope to have something like 4 or 5 when it's done. So, just starting off, the Lichess site has a lot of really good information on the atomic variant already on its own. So, they have rules, they have these learning material here, which is super good. If you look at the other variants, they go crazy house, right? They have a video, but the video is not. It's just Chess Network playing Crazy House, so it's not like super. He's not really an expert in Crazy House, and they have some examples and basic strategy. But with Atomic, I really recommend you check out their resources they have. Um, they have openings, endgames, and puzzles, and these endgames are really good. I'm going over them. I really like them. This is super helpful stuff. And then they also have openings and tactics. These tactics are what we'll be going over in just a second. So yeah, go over some of these in your own time if you want to learn and study. So first of all, I'll be going over um, often the common patterns you'll see with the queen in openings. So starting off, you often see white moving the e-pawn, typically e3, but sometimes e4. The two most common openings are knight f3 and e3, and I'll explain why in a second. So starting off with, they show e4, but the point is that it brings out the queen and it brings out the bishop. So the queen can be very strong in atomic chess just because single queens can checkmate kings. Um, so in this case, we'll start to see the pattern of bringing the queen out very early for attacks. And so this is an example where after g5, white already has a forced mate in 2. And the idea is queen h5, and you want to pressure f7. So um, when you take f7, the king will blow up, and white wins immediately. And the king's actually trapped here, and there's no way to block. So the reason why g5 is such a big mistake is usually if some other move, and queen h5, then g6 defends. So you got to really be careful moving your g-pawn too far. Another common pattern, this one is super common. You don't often see e4, knight c6, but you do see this line in many other openings with e3, some other defensive move like e6 or something. But then later when the e-pawn's traded, you see this idea of bringing the queen out. And when you bring the queen out, you threaten f7, so black has to block. It's absolutely forced. And then you have queen d5, which is a very nice fork. And yeah, you can see the path of the queen here. And this forks the d7 square, which will blow up the king if I take here. Like you play some random move, I take, the king goes, right? And same with f7. If I take, it blows up the king. So basically, this is both of these pawns will capture the king. So this is basically forking the king, and there's no way to defend. If he blocks one, you take the other one. So this is already checkmate. So even here, knight c6 is already forced checkmate for white because of this pattern. And this one is probably one of the most important ones you'll see. Queen h5, queen d5. Okay, next one's e5. This one's much rarer, but the important lesson here is to not play e5 as black. e5 is already a very rare move, just because it weakens up these squares, which you often see the queen coming to, or in this case you'll see queen f3 and queen d5. So actually e6 is perfectly fine here, and this is the main theory. And the idea is that you never have these kind of tricks because all these squares are covered by the pawns. So I can't play queen here. If I go like this, he just blocks. He's blocking. If I try something like this, then just trade queens, and black is still doing completely fine. But in this case, if black does play e5, which is completely losing, um, white has queen f3, and again threatens checkmate. So after the push, to escape checkmate, if you try knight f6, this actually does survive, but it's still much worse for black. But yeah, if you do play f5 to try to escape that, then there's the same idea of queen d5, forking these two squares. And after move, there's checkmate. And you can't even try some trick like this. This could work. This is actually a very nice trick you'll see. Another pattern you'll see is black will play bishop b4 as an in-between move. And the idea is if I go for checkmate, then he can take and blow up my king first. And this actually isn't a win for white. But in this case, it doesn't work because after bishop b4, I can just take here and win black's king first. So the lesson here is be careful about playing e5 early on. Typically, you want to develop a lot more before you play e5. Okay, next one. So Yeah, so this one is not a checkmate pattern, but it's the same idea of playing queen h5 and then bring your queen to the center and attacking a lot of squares. So queen h5 here, again, this is the same idea, and the only way besides g6 to defend is king b7, but this is checkmate very quickly. You're attacking the king, moves away, you can take, and if he blocks, you can just take. So he has to play g6 again, and now you have queen e5. Queen e5 threatens checkmate here, so he has to block again. Bishop e6 is best, and then you can take c7 and win material. So d5 is considered a mistake, I would say. Okay, and then e5 again. So another pattern where you see e5 doesn't work in the opening. Always watch out as black from playing e5. So here queen h5, g6 is also forced again. Yeah, and then queen h3. So this is another pattern you see. It's a little bit more rare, I will say, and it attacks d7. And the idea is there's no way to block it. If f5, you just take with the pawn, and then this is still being attacked. If you try to push the pawn, queen d7 is checkmate, because the king can never capture anything that's next to it. Let's check if this stream is... Yep, looks good. So if you want to say something in chat, go ahead. I'll try to respond. I'll check every few minutes. Okay. So, yeah, and then here there's actually no way to block. The only way to survive this would be to block, or you can try king f7. But in this case, just queen e6 will lead to mate very soon. So, yeah, the only way to survive this in any other position would be to block, but you don't have any way to block. f5 was the only way, but then just get rid of it, and this is checkmate for white. So again, e5, and now we're going with knight f6 line, which still doesn't work because of queen f5. That's very nice. So the same sort of idea of pressuring here, like on the diagonal, but no blockers again, and moving the d pawn doesn't work because of this, and doing nothing also doesn't work because takes blows up the king. Again, e5 messing something up. So here, there's queen g4, and same threat here. Only move to block is f5, but this allows queen g6, and then mate pretty soon. c6. Yeah, this is another nice mate pattern. You'll see this a lot in the double knight opening, which is actually what I like to play in Atomic. Knight f3 and then knight c3. I'll go over, well, I might go over openings in a future video. We'll see. But this one is only commonly seen in this opening, so if you don't play, you probably won't see it as much. But it's the idea that after queen h5, this is when you get rid of the f-pawn. So you'll have a knight here. You'll need to open up the queen here and get rid of this f-pawn. So once you get rid of the f-pawn, e4, and when your queen opens up, you're threatening checkmate here. So c6 is trying to defend against these knight advances, but it's too slow for black because white has queen h5 check, g6 is forced, and this very nice queen g5. And now taking e7 will blow up the king, and again you almost always want a blocker to defend these kind of attacks, but there's no way to block on f6. So this is threatened. This is a mate threat. Only way to block is to move the e-pawn, but then you can just take the queen or move there and checkmate anyways. It's complete winning. I think this is a similar idea. Yeah, a similar idea where if black tries to defend with this idea with e6, so now queen h5, g6 here is not checkmate yet. It's still completely winning because after queen takes, black loses a knight, so this is just much better for white. Okay, and this is actually a little bit of opening theory. So the two most common starting moves I mentioned earlier are e3 and knight f3. I recommend you choose one of those to start learning, and probably the best way to learn is just by playing games, so I really recommend that. That's how I learned all my theory. But yeah, this is a really common opening where you see knight f3, and the response is almost always f6, because if you try to block... So the knight's advance is very powerful. Let's start with that. If you play e6, for example, then this is actually already checkmate because it's forking these two squares. Even if you try to block one of them, so, or not block, but at least get rid of the pawn. So let's say after d5, knight e5, you're threatening only one checkmate. So when I move now, there's no checkmate here. But the issue is this actually still will be checkmate because this bishop is stuck, can't move anywhere, and the knight is starting to take. Oops, oops, the knight is starting to take the bishop and blow up the king, and the king can't even run because you just take. So this is actually forced checkmate. It's mate 1. Yeah. So if you try the other way, which is blocking, technically both e5 and d6 are theory, but they're considered worse than f6, at least by the computer. And the reason for that is because they both allow knight g5, and the knight can try to enter like this. So f6 is the most common starting move, and then e3, again, just to bring out the queen eventually, so you're threatening moves like knight e5. e6, again, not e5. e5 is, that's probably one of the main takeaways from this session here, is black can almost never play e5, and if he does very early on, the first like 5 moves or so, then you should hopefully have a checkmate. So e6, and now you'll see the pawns cover these squares very well, so it's hard for white to make any advances. So I can try knight d4, threatening knight b5, which threatens to win some material. So c6 blocks that, but you can still play knight b5. C takes b5, and the important thing that this is actually completely fine for white because pawns are basically equal to pieces in atomic. So this is just a trade, basically. So queen h5 check, g6 is forced, and then queen b5. And now you're threatening to take on d7. If something like king f7, then I'm actually unsure. This should be checkmate, though. I think bishop d3. Yeah. So you're threatening to take here. If he moves, then just check anyways. This is mate, and this is mate. So he has to block with f5, but then you bring your queen in, and this is going to be... if this, then queen e5, and this is going to be checkmate. You're threatening a bunch of checkmates. So knight e6 is forced. Again, in these kind of attacks where the queen attacks here, the best solution is almost always to block with a piece if you can, or a pawn. And this is a very, very nice idea. This is probably the first opening I ever learned, and you see this a lot around like 1700 level, which is this idea of bringing the queen to b6. And it looks like a mouse slip. It's kind of, I thought that was funny. He mentioned it looks like a mouse slip, and that's because it looks like you can just play a takes b6 and win the queen. But this actually doesn't work because of bishop b5, and now you're attacking d7 again, threatening to blow up the king. But in this case, there is no blocker for c6, so this will be checkmate unless he moves his king away, and then you win the queen back. And rook takes wins some material, but after b4, this is all theory, and this is known to be winning for white. So the correct move here is actually king f7 immediately, and the game continues with queen c7, and this is actually all theory, and you'll see moves like bishop b4, yeah, knight h6, and this is considered better for white, but it's still a game. So it's kind of an interesting opening. It's good to learn as well. So now some knight patterns. So starting off knight f3, also a very, very strong opening. And I actually mentioned this earlier, where the knight e5 move, the knight f3 threatens to play knight e5 and forks these two squares and threatens checkmate. So e6 doesn't work immediately because this is just checkmate. e5 is, I mean, they put this, it's a question mark, but e5 is technically theory. It's a little bit riskier than f6 though, so you only see it really high level who know openings very well. But oh, okay, f6 is losing. So in more advanced theory, you see knight g5, f5, and then this is a very nice trick. You try to bring the knight in, then queen h4, queen d4, and this is actually a pattern we learned earlier for the opposite color. So if you can look at this position, remember we saw queen h5, queen d5, so this is the exact opposite. Ooh, it doesn't work in this case though, because knight takes e5. So maybe, oh, I guess that doesn't work. Is it? I'm thinking maybe queen h4 and then knight f6. Yeah, this is the winning line. I know this is winning. White can't play knight f7 here. I think it's because knight f6 here, and now you're threatening to bring your knight in and threaten these checkmate. If knight takes e5, then you have queen d4. So yeah, the computer gives -7 for black, so this is completely winning for black if white does this. But yeah, it does give much better for white if he doesn't. But in this case, this is a mistake to play f6, because now the knight can come in, there's no queen h4 ideas, so queen has to move, because this is a checkmate threat, and then knight d6 check, and yeah, it attacks c8. So if king d8, then that's checkmate. So he has to give up the queen. If he tries to play c takes, he loses the queen anyways. Oh yeah, and this is very nice. This is also very specific theory. It's not so useful, but it's just nice to see this knight e6 trick and fork these two squares. Okay, this one is much more important in my opinion. You see this a lot with a few different openings, where this knight will come in, and if he tries to escape like this and save his queen, the correct move here is queen takes and just lose a lot of material. But if he tries to save his queen, you have this nice knight e6 move, which forks both these two pieces, and the king can't take or the bishop can't take because it would blow up the king, so it's losing. So this is a very nice thing to help. This is probably the most important part of this lesson, just because it helps understand how to defend, which is really hard in a game that's so aggressive like Atomic. So it may seem like a move like knight f3 is already so winning because this is a mate threat, this is winning a lot of material threat, so f6 covers both, but then white has knight d4, and knight d4 threatens knight f5. So let's see what happens with knight f5. Let's say it threatens both knight b5 and knight f5. So let's say I block b5, right? Then he goes to f5, and he's threatening to take here and win my king. So I have to move the e-pawn, and then he takes here, and I lose a lot of material. So this is terrible for me. If I try blocking the other way, so e6 blocks f5, then he plays knight b5, and he's starting to take on c7. Sorry, here. Threatening to take on c7, and threatening to take on a7. And a7 would win these two pieces, and c7 would win these three pieces. So both are completely losing. So it may look a little bit like white is just absolutely destroying here, but there is a move to survive, and that's knight h6. This is a very nice idea. So the idea is to counterattack. You see this a lot in Atomic as well, where at more advanced levels you see more counterattacking than regular defense. So here, knight f5 doesn't work because you can just take. And knight b5, if you want to attack and win material, also doesn't work because of knight g4, and this is where the counterattacking comes in. This forces the f-pawn to move, because knight takes f2 is a checkmate threat, but once the f-pawn moves, you have just knight f2. And knight f2 now forces checkmate, because the queen is trapped, and when I take the queen, I'll blow up the king. So no matter what black does or white does, you can just take the queen and end the game. Even if, this is another important idea to see, is even if white goes for a check, I'm actually capturing the white king before he can capture mine. So this is already game over, even though I'm in check. So most important takeaway from this is try to play, you'll often see after knight f3 you have to play f6. So whenever you can, try to play knight h6 to counterattack if white is trying to go for central attacks of the knight. And then the main takeaway from this one is definitely don't play e5 as black early on, and also watch out for queen h5 and bring your queen to the center, or even to b5. Okay, and then here's another two games I want to go over. These are both common patterns that aren't mentioned in these studies that I thought was worth mentioning as well. So this one is taken from a 1-0 Atomic game from Jake State Farm and Anu Quenz, both very good Atomic players. So here Jake State Farm played knight c3, which is a terrible mistake. And this is another very common pattern that you see with queen b6. So bring the queen out along this diagonal, threatens checkmate on f2. And what the defending player always has to be careful about is to have enough squares to block, or have enough pieces to block this diagonal attack. And in this case, it may look like he does, but he actually doesn't. So yeah, this is exactly it. Bishop e3, and it seems like he's blocking. But black has this very nice intermediate idea of knight g4. So knight g4 threatens checkmate here, and when you move the f-pawn, then you can take e3. And now the queen is again threatening checkmate here. So he just tries a desperate move here, but it's completely lost. E takes d4, and then queenside castles. But queen e3 just simply leads to checkmate because you can't block. And the king moves. That's just checkmate. So the idea here is this queen b6 move. You'll see a lot of times, or as white, you bring queen to b3, and it'll be checkmate along this diagonal, because black doesn't have enough blockers, or the defender doesn't have enough blockers. So in this case, there's just not enough pieces to block, even after bishop e3. This very nice knight g4 intermediate, attacking these two squares, allows black to win the game. So here the computer will probably recommend queen takes g4, I think. That's the only way to survive, and it's just completely, should be much better for black. You can either play queen d8 and allow this. Oh no, actually this is already checkmate. Very nice. Same pattern as before. Sorry, it keeps scrolling. But yeah, there's a bunch of ways that we can see these patterns with the queen. So queen d8 here, and then it looks like you can win material, but same idea of the hook, where after g3 you have queen d4, and it forks these two squares. So, checkmate. And then this game, this is actually played by me. I was white against Kappa Matoyov. And in this position, he played queen g4, and it looks like he's got checkmate here. So the idea is he wants to come for queen e2 or queen d1, both of which are checkmate because they are contact check with the queen, which is almost always going to be checkmate. And I can't go anywhere. And typically, the only way to survive here would be to put some piece on f3, some sort of blocker, like you move some piece there so the queen can't get to these squares. That's the only, or to capture something, capture the queen, or capture like a nearby piece. But in this case, I can't do any of that. So I can't take the queen, I can't take this pawn and blow up the queen, and I can't block the queen from entering. So it really looks like checkmate, actually. This is kind of an advanced tactic, and I encourage you to pause if you're watching the replay, to pause and try to figure it out. So yeah, I'll give you a few seconds to pause it, but the defense for white is very nice. This is actually completely fine for white. So the defense is actually to utilize your queen on b8, and the idea is to learn that capturing pieces next to the king is the equivalent of checkmate, right? So if I'm attacking this rook, I'm sort of checking the black king, because if I take it, I take the king. So you sort of use this idea to pin this queen. It's actually queen g3. It's a very, very nice move. And now what you're doing is you're pinning this queen to this pawn. So if he tries to go in for checkmate, you beat him to it and take the pawn and blow up his king. So in this situation, he actually can't move his queen off this file, and his queen is essentially pinned. So in the game, he tried knight d3 check. I just take it, and then he played g6. So then I just traded queens, because g6 is the idea is to get rid of this pin. So I just traded queens, and that gets rid of all the threats. So I survive. So the takeaway from this is to try to be careful and watch for attacking these pieces next to the king, because that's the equivalent of check. So this actually a very, very nice move, pinning the queen to this pawn, and white completely survives here. Okay, and then lastly, I want to go over a few endgames. There's 7 endgames here. So first one is the idea. The first thing I would say, very general idea that's really important to know, is that kings can touch an atomic. So if I mean, look at this. This is completely fine, because if any player tries to take the other player, then both kings blow up, which is considered illegal. It's not considered a draw. So you'll see a queen versus a king, which is kind of funny, because typically in regular chess, a queen in regular chess, pieces are much weaker than in atomic. So in regular chess, a queen versus a king is a draw. Like, imagine white didn't even have a king, but with a queen and king, it's a win. But in atomic, this is actually a draw, because the issue is when you try to run away with your king, he will keep following you, and there's no way for you to really escape his king. You can't really do any tricks. He's just going to stay next to your king. No matter where you run, he stays next to your king. So this is actually a draw. And the way to survive is you need 2 pieces. So what you need to do is you need to put your king in the corner and force the enemy king to go away. So here's how they do it. You bring your king to the corner first, and then you get this position. Now what this position does is black's only legal move is to move away now. Now he has to move away, and then he can't come next to your king anymore. And that's just checkmate. So the idea here is to form this little wall in the corner, and there's no way for his king to stay next to your king, so he has to go away. And you can do it with other pieces too. This could be a rook, for example. This could be a bishop, whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, and then the next idea is the other checkmate with the queens, and that is... Oh yeah, okay, so this is the idea that I was mentioning, where no matter what pieces these are, as long as one of them is a queen, you're fine. So it could be a bishop, it could be anything, it could even be a pawn. So now you can do the same idea where this king is in the corner and black has no choices to survive. He can actually try to push this pawn, but you just use triangulation of the queen, and eventually he'll be in stalemate and has to move his king away. And here it looks like he can take, but it would blow up his own king, so he can't. And this will eventually be checkmate. You just force his king back, and checkmate. Okay, so sometimes you'll have the kings touching and only one queen, and you can't remove this pawn because the other pawn is in the way. So the solution to this one is that you want to capture this pawn and blow up the black king. I'll just check chat real quick. So it's good, 25 minutes. Okay. So in order to do this, you'll bring your queen to a square that attacks the pawn, and then bring your king around, just like they're showing, to force the black king to follow you, and then eventually take when it only blows up the black king. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, and that's why they have 3 king walks on the side, and you'll see multiple different ones. But in this case, yeah, okay, you block the king off from entering, and then eventually you get to this position where you're forcing the king to follow you. If he goes here, then this is just checkmate, right? So he has to follow you, but then now you can take on d5 and blow up the enemy king and keep yours. So this technique sort of takes practice to figure out where to put your queen and where to put your king, and how to like maneuver the enemy king that he has to walk into something like this. There's a few more patterns you can see. You can even do it without a pawn, if you just sidestep like this. And yeah, they show king g4 because if he tries to follow you, then queen takes here, wins the king. And then this case is similar. Yeah, same idea, where you'll just keep walking your king away, keep the queen attacking the pawn, and eventually you can take the enemy king. Okay, pawn races. Let me make a concluding note on this. So I would say this is one of the harder beginner endgames to learn. It takes a bit of practice to get used to it. So I would just play games and practice to learn this one. This is pretty important. And then also another note for the queens in the corner. It's pretty easy to mess up. And for example, if let's say queen h3, queen king here, I've done this many times where like I have a faraway piece, like this, right? And I'm like, okay, let's bring the queen over. But this is actually stalemate. This is a draw because the king has no legal moves. So you have to be very, very careful that you, like in this situation, if here it's tempting to play queen g2, but the best move would actually be like queen b8, for example, and then bring the queen to h2, and the king has to go. So that's a stalemate trap. That's pretty easy to make. I've made this mistake many times on time pressure when I was lower rated, so be careful about that. And then lastly is pawn races. So a lot of times you'll see once the pawns are all traded and pieces are gone, the kings are blocking the enemy pawns. So in this situation, it's white's turn, and white always, the important thing is to always move a diagonal away. So when you move a diagonal away, he'll push, and then you block again, and you're basically shifting the turn to your opponent using the triangulation of the king. And now he has to move. He does the same idea, and the same thing repeats, and eventually he's now stuck with the pawn, and he has to move his king and allow promotion, and this is just checkmate. So the idea is he really doesn't want to be checkmated, right? And using this triangulation idea, whichever player has the farther back king is the losing player. So if I have my king on b3 and pawn was on b4, let's say here, for example. So here, his pawn is 3 moves away from promoting, right? 1, 2, 3 squares, and my pawn is 1, 2, 3 squares away from promoting. So whoever's turn it is here is actually the losing player. If it was white's turn, he would have to move back first, and then same triangulation idea would repeat like this, and then like this, and then eventually white would have to move away and then promote. So basically, whoever turn it is has to let the other pawn start pushing, and whoever turn it is actually loses here. So a lot of times you'll see in endgames, you actually want to bring, if there's no pieces left, you actually want to bring your king as far up as possible, in order to block the enemy pawns from as far away from promotion as possible. So this is winning for white. Okay, and then another thing I just want to recommend, this also given by Lichess on that same page here. It's endgame practice right here. Super useful. So 42 chapters, 42 different endgames for you to try and practice. So like an example, they make you play with a computer, so here I can just do it. Whoops. So there we go, it's checkmate, right? And then you can practice each of these endgames. And there are actually some very interesting situations, like this one is really nice, because if I were to highlight the queen, the squares that the queen defends, So in most situations, when you have a queen and king versus king, it's a draw, right? Because black king will come next to the white king. But here, because the queen is controlling all these squares, what white can do is he can run back and hide behind, and the black king can never cross this line because the queen is covering it, unless it's touching the white king. So the important thing is that the white king has to run like this, and what happens now is that here the black king can cross this queen line because it's touching my king, so I can never take it. But if I move my king back like this, he now can't come across this line because then I'll just take his king. And now you can just do the standard checkmate because you've isolated your king. This is there we go. Okay. And then yeah, this one's the same idea I mentioned earlier. Just get your king to the corner. Oh yeah, again here, another idea you see if his king is on g1, you want to move one square before and then go to g1. And then yeah, you force his king away and this is just checkmate. So yeah, okay, I'm not going to go through all of them just because it's pretty long and I think it's good for you to practice on your own. So I recommend if you want to learn and get better, just try all these different ones. Maybe comment if you're confused on one of them. I'll try to answer or have my friend answer who also helps with the channel. So yeah, I really recommend that. And the other resource I wanted to recommend is the Introduction to Knight F3. So this one goes over a few opening lines after Knight F3, which is probably the best starting move to learn in Atomic. So I really recommend that. It's the first move that I learned. And then it goes over some of the ideas we mentioned earlier, like here there's Knight E5, and that's a fork, so Knight H6 doesn't work. There's a few lines it goes over. It's good to learn some of these basic lines and then just try it out in some games and see what happens. That's what I recommend. Start with slow games, and then, because if you play fast games, you're not going to learn many lines. It's best to play slow and then eventually get faster. By slow, I just mean like 3 minutes or more. It doesn't have to be super slow. But as long as you're thinking for each move and try to calculate the lines and maybe remembering them, then it's good for learning. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed it. I just went over some basic patterns with both the queen and the knight, and then these are two more patterns, this pin idea to the pawn, and this queen b6 attacking Alchemist diagonal, or sometimes you'll see it as white. You'll see queen b3 and attacking like this. Those are really common patterns to know as well. And then some basic endgames, covered that as well. And then I recommend these two studies. This one is a endgame practice, which I think you should practice on your own. And this is Introduction to Knight F3 opening, both of which can be found in this Atomic page on Lichess. One of them is the Intro to Knight F3, and the other one's endgame practice right here. So you get to this page by, at least the way I get to it, I don't know if there's a faster way. If you go to tournaments and then find an Atomic tournament, this little link in the top where it says Atomic will send you to the Atomic rules page, and then you can find these studies and go over them. So I highly recommend you try those out if you're interested in improving. Hope you enjoyed watching that. I'm finished my lesson now. I'll probably publish the next one hopefully next week or a week and a half from now. And I'll try to go to more advanced ideas. I know eventually I want to get to there's the Atomic Shield last month where Hysterix and a bunch of other top Atomic players played, and there's some really interesting ideas that you could see there, but this is much more advanced, so I'll probably get to that like few months from now. Next week I'll do sort of an intermediate lesson, and I also plan to do more streams soon, and some anti-chess lessons and anti-chess streams, and hopefully I get to Crazy House. That's actually my best variant. Here, I'll introduce myself, I guess, in the end. I'm Lucas JF on Lichess, and I play Crazy House, Anti-Chess, Atomic, and Horde. And Horde, I mean, yeah, okay, I'm pretty good at all of them, I guess. My best is definitely Crazy House, though. I'm really proud of my Crazy House ability. So yeah, I'll probably be, eventually I'm hoping to make variant videos, both lessons and streams on all of the 4 variants that I play. Hopefully in the future I'll get to that. But okay, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully subscribe, send a comment if you want to. I'll try to respond. But yeah, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and bye.